Well, infancy and childhood, that is the module we're going to be looking at. And it will probably have numerous sections here. But first of all, let's just look real quickly at the nature of the change that occurs in infancy and during infancy and childhood. What you see in this diagram is the typical nervous system network and what happens from a birth that you see here to 3 months to 15 months. So we're from 3 months to a year later, the density of networking that occurs in little ones. And so the thing to keep in mind when we're talking about infancy and childhood is that within the brain, nerve cells form before birth. Those are already present. But after birth, the neural networks that enable us to walk, talk, and remember have this incredibly wild growth spurt. From ages about 3 to 6, growth occurs most rapidly in the frontal lobes, which enable planning, rational planning, and executive functioning. And the other aspect to keep in mind here is just defining for a minute the idea of maturation and a couple other points underneath it. The first one is this is really the biological growth that occurs. And it really enables the orderly changes, if you will, that are part of what we refer to as maturation. So there are orderly changes in behavior. It sets the course, basic course of development, and ultimately experience eventually adjusts that. So maturation itself sets the course itself is set, but what adapts and adjusts it is experience. And we have talked about that before when we talk about nature and nurture. What nature endows, nurture develops. And essentially, maturation by its nature really accounts for commonalities such as standing and so forth. So maturation accounts for commonalities in the course of development and so forth. What we see then is the idea of the adjustments and adaptation that occurs as time moves along, and that oftentimes is very much a part of this thing that we refer to as maturation. So the aspects that run along with it essentially is that the nature of experience changes things as it goes along, and the experience also makes for adaptation to be possible. The other aspect, just to keep in mind here, is that this proceeds in a relatively sequential fashion in pretty much everyone, partly because of development, partly because of genes itself. And so it occurs in a sequential fashion, but the timing varies from individual to individual. So if you were to take an infant into a doctor, they would be looking for the sequences of change and how much timing. And there's the timing itself ultimately really does vary from person to person, but as is often the case, the sequence is pretty much universal. Now, the other thing that occurs during this time, and we're talking mostly about physical, is something that we refer to as infantile amnesia. And And infantile amnesia refers to memory development in infants. And when you hear people refer to what they remember, generally their earliest recollections is around the age of 3. And there's a reason for that, partly because of the development of the hippocampus, which we already have seen is critically important to memory development, memory consolidation. And the hippocampus develops relatively slowly. And the thing is that when we talk about development itself, it always moves from the head down. So the idea of infantile amnesia is this area where kids don't necessarily remember anywhere from about 3 to 5 years of age, roughly, where memories begin to take shape and become part of remembered experiences. It doesn't mean that people can't learn. It just means that they don't necessarily remember before that. Now, there are some caveats sometimes. And when I say caveat, it means just a qualification. And on occasion, the caveat has to do with trauma and crisis. And a lot of times kids will remember some things, partly because the event is so hot, if you will. It grabs their attention and it sears into their memory that they remember it. And so that's part of the only caveat when we're talking about infantile amnesia. Usually before the age of 3, we don't have many memories, but after that, we do.